And so Mike would challenge me and say, hey, like for one of my ideas, he'd be like, I got it, save the earth, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, you have to make some fucking money. Otherwise, you don't have a business, right? Like you can have the loftiest goals, but if it fails, like, you're done.
Without economics,
right?
Work.
And so.
Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. Some of you may remember that a couple of months ago we teamed up with Tecovas on a show to win a pair of their Stockton boots, which are the same boots that I wear all the time. Well, they are partnering with the show again as we present an ongoing series of epic stories from people who use their gear in the field, have dirt on their boots, and really live with nature. And in the first of these, we're going to speak with Matt Skoglund. He is the founder of North Bridger Bison. I had the privilege of going to his operation just a couple of weeks ago. And here we dive into regenerative grazing through his bison herd and how he is really reconnecting people with their food. Matt even throws a few jabs towards the plant-based food debate. It's a fascinating discussion, and it was a pleasure to spend a day with him. If you want to read more stories about Tecovas, or stories that we've done in conjunction with Tecovas, we will have more going live on the Modern Huntsman website, which is modernhuntsman.com, in the coming months. Or you can also visit the Outpost section of the Tecovas website and check out their boots and their new range of clothing. And just before we get right into it, it's important for me to remind you all that the latest volume of Modern Huntsman is now shipping. It is the water issue. There's some incredible articles in there. So if you don't have your hands on a copy, head over to the Modern Huntsman website and get yourself one. Preferably, add yourself as a subscriber, because then you will be one of the first people to get a copy when the new ones drop. And of course, lastly, I need to thank my Patreon supporters who have stood by us all these years. And in the top tier this week, we have Colin Knight, James Marchington, Mark Sbrosky, Richard McNeil, Richard Stevens, Ronnie Speakman, Thomas Cameron, and the team at South Ayrshire Stalking. If you would like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Byron Pace. Matt, welcome to the podcast. What a privilege it's been to go out with you today and stand in the sagebrush looking at your bison. What an incredible place.
Oh.
Explain where we are. In terms of the context of the world, we have a global audience here, so explain where we are.
Sure. So we are in southwest Montana. We are about 30 miles northeast of Bozeman, Montana, on the west side of the Shields Valley. About, hour and a half north of Yellowstone National Park.
Most people will know Yellowstone.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. Like you said, sagebrush steppe country. Right here it is, but the Shields Valley, spectacular place. You've got the North Bridger Mountains on the west side, the Crazy Mountains on the east side, and very open country in between the mountains. Just spectacular.
It is breathtaking. The sun has literally just dipped over the horizon as we're starting this podcast. We've been shooting stills here all day.
Also about 25 minutes from my house. So Matt and I are neighbors, and we've only hung out twice in the last year. So we're working on that.
Now, we're going to be talking primarily about what you're doing here, and we're going to be talking about bison and regenerative grazing. But before we get into that, because it was very clear by the enthusiasm in your voice when I arrived here, the first thing you wanted to talk about was not your bison, but salmon. Tell me about why? And it wasn't just salmon; it was Atlantic salmon. Why?
I fell hard for fly fishing in high school, and have been lucky enough to fly fish for Atlantic salmon in a few different places. And I have a very, very dear friend who is this amazing chef, Jeremy Charles, in Newfoundland. And he's taken me to Newfoundland and to Labrador. And before that, I'd fished once in Scotland and a couple times in Ireland. And I think just in America, North America, Pacific salmon, the 5 species of Pacific salmon get so much attention, right? Like Alaska, as they should. It's amazing. And most people don't even know that Atlantic salmon exist, and that New England used to have, zillions of Atlantic salmon. And so I don't know, I guess I'm just kind of fascinated with the fish and the fact that, and they're facing lots of threats, both in North America and in Europe, where there used to be a lot of them, and now there's not a hell of a lot less, and they face a lot of threats. So,
and you've been to my home country.
Yes,
How long ago was that?
That was in 2006.
Okay.
Yeah, so 15 years ago.
You need to come back. Where did you go?
We stayed near the town of Nairn.
Yep.
And fished the River Findhorn.
The first 2 years of my life were there.
Wow.
On Nairn, yeah.
That's crazy.
In Nairn.
It was amazing. It was just the river, the countryside, the landscape, the whole thing was just surreal. And there's just something about fishing for Atlantic salmon that, knowing that it's very low odds, right? So you're hoping for a tug.
Sadly, increasingly low odds.
Yeah. But to know, I find swinging wet fly is just very meditative, therapeutic. You just get into a rhythm and slowly work your way downstream, and knowing that on any cast you might hook up with this amazing, powerful fish from the ocean that's come up the river. I don't know. I just think the whole story is really, really cool.
Amazing. Well, you will have to get yourself over to Scotland at some point. I can show you some of the spots.
I would love. Oh man, a little tough right now, but at some point I would absolutely love it.
So, as I said in the very brief intro, we were walking with bison out here. Tell me your backstory, because Tyler, I think, told me you were a lawyer.
Yeah.
So how does a lawyer end up as a mountain man of the sagebrush steppe with a herd of bison?
Fair question.
It's obviously a it's been a winding path to get here. And it's just everyone's got their own story, right? And so mine is, I've always loved nature and the outdoors ever since I was a little kid. I was born and raised outside Chicago. Eventually, I went to college, went to law school, a huge interest in environmental conservation, and fell hard for the West, and then fell in love with Montana in college, did some big road trips out here after college and in law school. And so Sarah and I got married in 2008 and quit our jobs and moved to Montana. It was just a pure lifestyle decision.
Okay, but pause for a second.
Yeah.
I want to understand. So you clearly, that this entire earlier part of your life had this fascination with conservation and nature. So what were you doing in law? Was it related at all?
No. When I graduated from law school, I clerked for a federal magistrate judge in Chicago for a year, this amazing guy. And then I spent 2 years in the general litigation group of a large law firm in Chicago, which I knew wasn't for me long term. It was a good experience. There's some great people there, but I was trying to figure out what the next step was. And so I thought it would be, at one point, environmental law, but ultimately decided
this is what I was imagining. Yeah.
Yeah. And I ultimately decided that just the legal world was just not for me. Litigation wasn't for me.
Okay.
And so when we moved here, I had applied for a job with the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC, which is a large environmental group, and hoped I'd get it. Didn't know if I'd get it.
Is that a government body or not?
No, it's a private 501c3 NGO, just
based in North America.
Yep. So they're headquartered. I always love saying this. They're headquartered in New York City and have offices in New York, DC, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Beijing, and Bozeman. Yeah. And
Bozeman being the most important place. Clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was in Livingston for the first 5 years. And then we moved to Bozeman in 2013, but it was a non-litigation policy position, policy advocacy position. And so I had no idea if I'd get it, but ultimately I got the job and, really enjoyed it for a long time. Really great people, important work. But over time, I just, I was craving to do something more tangible that you have more control over, environmental policy work. You're trying to get other people, typically state or federal government agencies, to do something you have very little control over. It can be a long slog. And we had 2 kids along the way. There was some work travel involved. So I was just really craving to do something tangible, land-based, conservation-based, on my own, out of the nonprofit world, something entrepreneurial. And so bison was the big issue I worked on at NRDC all those years. And
okay.
So
was that your first sort of connect with bison as a species? On a deeper kind of level?
For sure. Yeah.
Came through your work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I used to, come out here to, I love, fly fishing in Yellowstone Park's like one of the coolest
Why
things.
would you want to be in Montana and fly fish?
Yeah, exactly.
That's terrible.
Right. Exactly. And so, I, drove by bison, and I guess knew the on a very, very superficial level, the story that like these animals maybe once kind of almost went extinct, but they're still here and they're in Yellowstone, but had no real understanding. But like you drive by them in the park, going to fish Slough Creek or the Lamar or Soda Butte or something, and then it was at NRDC when I really started to like dive deeply into the species and the history and the story, and just to this day as we were talking out there, like just endlessly fascinated by them. So worked there, and then like literally there was an article in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle in the summer of 2016 about the bison industry, and that the bison industry was growing and they were looking for more producers. And I literally read it and like kind of chuckled to myself, thinking like, man, that would be so cool for someone that could do that. Like obviously that wouldn't be me. Like I'm a kid from suburban Chicago. Like that's just
and this is the commercial meat industry we're talking about.
Yeah,
this is separate to what I imagine, because you just mentioned Yellowstone. What a lot of people will be thinking will be the big bison herds in Yellowstone,
exactly,
which is not a commercial meat operation.
Exactly right. So Yellowstone or wild bison, and then this was talking about bison on ranches, private herds being raised ultimately for meat.
Yeah,
and so I kind of read the article and sort of was like, man, that'd be so cool, but obviously not for me. I'm not qualified to do that. And then but a year and a half went by, and I can just kind of continued to think about it.
You just have this niggle there.
Yeah, it was just like
I've always wanted to own Highland cows.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm sure one day when I'm old and I can't travel so much anymore, I'll probably end up doing that. But I've had this desire. I don't really know why, because they look cool, I think.
Yeah, it just was there, and then and then in the fall of 2017, I read this book, Buffalo for the Broken Heart by Dan O'Brien, which is this amazing book.
Not one I know.
Yeah, it's incredible.
What's the premise of it?
He had a cattle ranch in South Dakota and bought a few bison, started a bison ranch, and it's a memoir, so it's like his own personal story, and he's an amazing writer. And he ultimately founded this bison ranch and this bison meat business called Wild Idea Buffalo, and he's an absolute hero of mine now. And in the book, he talks about how he's the one that pioneered the process of field harvesting bison, which is instead of shipping them to slaughter with bison, because they haven't been domesticated, that's like super high stress for bison.
To be put in the back of a trailer like normal cattle would be, and then driven miles.
Right. So bison are just, totally different, super high stress. And so you just reverse that. You, instead of putting them on a truck and shipping them somewhere, you drive out into the pasture and kill them where they're grazing. And I'm a big meat hunter, and just a passionate food person. And so like literally when I read that, I had no idea it existed. And that was like an instant, I didn't know this existed. I want to do this. And I know there are people that are going to connect with this.
I mean, as a hunter, it's an easy connect for us if you're someone who's hunted before, because you're field harvesting wild animals all the time. Okay, the bison for agricultural purposes are in fenced areas, but the process is kind of the same. I wonder, is there different like legislation and regulation around field harvesting compared to agriculture? Where you're shooting something in the field rather than actually it being put down in an abattoir.
There are. Yes, there are. There's ultimately like three different levels of, I guess, how would you say it? Like certification, if you will.
Okay.
So there's like federally inspected meat, state inspected meat, and then custom exempt meat. And I'm hesitating because it's like a deep dark,
I imagine there's like a book
but so anyways,
about a foot long.
The bottom line is that there there are different regulations depending on the species. So like bison actually have different rules and regs than cattle, and poultry, which I know very little about, have different rules and regs. So yes, there are different rules, but it's totally, it's obviously possible. It's legal. There's just, depending on if you're doing it custom exempt or if you want to ultimately get to state inspected or federal inspected, there's many more hoops to jump through than shipping it to a slaughterhouse, which is more the standard way of doing it.
Okay. And what was the next phase from you realizing, hang on, this is a field harvesting. I connect with this because I hunt and I understand this system of doing it and getting meat off the land, to actually owning a herd and having land yourself.
Yeah. It was a few things. I mean, one was I'd had some I just had this itch for a while of doing something, and I'd had other ideas. It was either a bad idea or bad timing or something. And this one amazing friend, mentor of mine, Mike Silverman, I'd always run these ideas by Mike, and he would say, "Can I swear? Is that if needed?" Okay, so
it normally happens
for historical accuracy. I need to. And so Mike would challenge me and say, "Hey, like for one of my ideas, he'd be like, I got it. Save the earth, blah 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 blah. At the end of the day, you have to make some fucking money. Otherwise, you don't have a business, right? Like you can have the loftiest goals, but if it fails, you're done
without economics,
right?
Nothing works.
And so for like the bison ranch and field harvest, I felt like, but besides it appealing to me on so many different levels, from like a landscape and an animal and all the different things, I felt like there's something here that I think people. I thought people would connect with, and then also like part of it was, in thinking about what I was going to with bison ranching, it's like at the end of the day, like we all have to eat, right? So like if you had an idea for like something that was like, some really cool, catchy plastic button, like the world doesn't need any more cool, catchy plastic buttons, but we all have to eat. And we have billions of people on the planet. And if we're lucky, we get to eat 3 meals a day. And so food is a necessity. And so it's like that really, I found that very appealing, of like working in the food industry and in agriculture. And yeah, so anyway, so my wife, Sarah, and I, had like some serious heart-to-hearts about it. And
it's a big move.
Yeah. And then, so, I mean, this
security and all the rest of it.
Oh yeah, no. And so, but part of it was also, when this was all getting going, our son was he had just turned 4, and our daughter was like 9-10 months old. So it was like, if we're ever going to do something big and risky and crazy, now's the time. Yeah. Like, I joked that like if we did this when they were like, if Otto, our son who's older, was like a junior in high school, he'd be like, that sounds great, but like I'm staying here, so good luck with your crazy ass idea. And so it was like, if we're gonna do it, now's the time. And so I'm like not exaggerating at all. Like I literally, this is like in early January 2018, I Googled like bison ranching consultant, because I knew enough to know that I knew like jack shit. Like I didn't know anything.
I mean, that's if you've got that knowledge, that's actually everything's downhill from there. I mean, thinking you know everything is the problem.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And so met this amazing guy. So there turned out to be this guy in Bozeman named Roland Cruz. Amazing guy. He's become an invaluable friend. And he, so we met for lunch, and we started talking. He kind of cut me off and was like, look, here's the deal. He's like, I teach this holistic management workshop on a bison ranch. You should come to it. And I took it both as like in two ways. One, it was like, this would be very helpful for you. And also it was like a test. Like, are you a dreamer or are you real? Are you serious about this? Yeah. Went home, talked to Sarah, and she's like, you got to go. You got to do it. And so
she doesn't think you're crazy.
No, I think it's more she knows I'm crazy. Oh, so okay.
This is going to ground you.
Yeah, it was already like she just given in and accepted. So exactly. She was like, this could be good for you.
Yeah.
And So went to this 4-day workshop with Roland, and it was amazing. Just, I guess pun intended, I just ate it up. Grazing, grass, water, soil, the whole thing. And came back really, really, really excited. And then, and then we started looking for land. And then I joke, the dream died pretty quickly. It was hard to find land, but then we stumbled upon these couple parcels, kept putting a business plan together. And I literally joke, but I'm serious that I was waiting. I'd never, I call it the bison pipe dream, because I just never expected it to actually happen. I was like, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep going, putting one foot in front of another until someone tells me to stop. But I had this huge insecurity of I didn't grow up on a ranch. I didn't grow up ranching. And so I was like, I can't do this. And I was waiting for someone to pull me aside and be like, so did they tell you about X, Y, and Z? And I'd be like, oh, there it is. That
was the barrier I didn't know about.
I knew it. And there wasn't. I obviously knew it was a huge leap and we would make mistakes and it would be hard and that sort of thing. But, at the same time, having no background in formal background in agriculture, there's a positive to that, which is, there's no, no bad habits to unlearn. There's no,
you probably question everything as well.
Yeah. You're just kind of for us, we're new. We wear it on our sleeves that we're, new at this. We're not pretending to be third generation Montana ranchers. And we just say, what's best for the land, the animal, and the business, let's do that. And so we found the land, we got it under contract, continued to work on a business plan, started, toured a couple of bison ranchers, developed some more mentors. And it just and even then, was kind of holding it loosely, because I was like, I just don't, at some point this is going to fall apart, and then it didn't, and so here we are,
and it's still going. And Tyler, when did you first find out about Matt?
So I think it was definitely on Instagram, and I just through mutual friends I started to see it pop up, and I think somebody had done did Stetson do a story?
A Boot Barn.
Okay, so it was something like that, but it was Kelly Beavers who was like, you got to go meet Matt.
She's the best.
Yeah, and so what I think is really interesting also, because I, as you know, live on a traditional cattle ranch. And so I also heard your name from, the family that owns that ranch as, people, younger generation who have been subjected to and passed down that traditional, often very hardline ranching lifestyle. Now some people are starting to think, okay, well, maybe there's another way. And to hear about what you're doing, because some of those ranches in our area, they have out-of-state landowners that they're having to collaborate with who want to have bison there. So now they were being subjected to these ideas. And so I think that's where it gets really interesting. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more and tell Byron about, beyond just the bison herd and the meat production, what you're trying to do philosophically with creating an interface between people, having come from an urban environment and creating that relationship with food.
Yeah, no, would love to. And I mean, first, I want to just point out, so our neighbors are all multi-generation cattle ranchers, and they're amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing people,
yeah.
Amazing ranchers. I know on a podcast you have to explain what you're doing. I'm looking around out here at their land, and it's spectacular.
Gorgeous.
They're just and so this, one thing, there's a saying now that I really like, which is it's not the cow, it's the how.
Yeah.
And so it's, because there's some people that think
all cows are evil.
Yeah. They think cattle are bad.
I mean, that's the common narrative.
Absolutely.
Across the planet these days.
Right. And nothing could be further from the truth. And people think that bison are these magical unicorns that, are perfect. And that's why that saying's so great, because it comes down to management, right? You can have amazing cattle ranches, like all of our neighbors here, and you can have bad bison ranches, or vice versa. It comes down to management. So I just, one of the coolest parts and most rewarding parts of this experience has been getting to know our neighbors and seeing their operations, how hard they work, the amazing ranchers they are, and we're just super grateful for that. And because of that narrative, I just always want to point that out, that like that cattle, it's the exact opposite. They're not evil. They're cattle are great. They're
if done right.
Yeah, and same with bison. Bison can be great if done right, and bison can be horrible for the land if done wrong.
Which goes very much against the let's stop having any kind of beef and meat production. Let's just all eat, I don't know, lettuce.
Right. I mean, so that's a good segue to Tyler's question and what you were saying, which is,
let's take the gloves off.
We're down with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, I think it's fair to say that the popular narrative being presented and put forward by the general media and public is that, meat is bad, plant-based is good, right? We have Meatless Mondays. Epicurious said they're going to no longer publish beef recipes. 11 Madison Park, one of the fanciest restaurants in the world, just went vegan. It's just constant, right? And I chuckle in the grocery store when I see like very obviously plant-based foods with a giant plant-based logo on it, and you're like, oh, like was that bread? Like, is there a species of, is there an animal that they make bread from? Like, but it's this like knee jerk. If I slap plant-based,
right,
that means it's good. It's good for the environment,
right?
And because it's not meat, because meat is bad.
Yeah,
and
it's this ridiculous default position that
right,
people have.
And the science it keeps coming out and like is showing us that nothing could be further from the truth, and that like everything in life, it's very nuanced, and so like just take animal, right? Like here we are in Montana, the Western United States, a landscape that evolved with millions of grazing animals, bison, elk, deer, pronghorn, for thousands of years. So removing animals from this landscape is completely unnatural. And the thing about regenerative agriculture that I find so exciting is there's this soil scientist, Nicole Masters, who says she hates the word sustainable because to sustain something is just to keep it as is.
Yeah, status quo.
Yeah, to regenerate something is to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying earlier, the way we've had some like high school kids come out to the ranch, and I'll say, so in about an hour, I'm going to go out and shoot a bison in the head with a rifle. And that sounds crazy.
Sounds pretty brutal.
Sounds pretty brutal and intense. But I'll make the case to you that. And just let this soak in, and we'll talk about it after. But that what I'm going to do is more ethical, humane, and environmentally friendly than the average broccoli you find at your grocery store. And they look at me like, this guy's completely nuts.
He's crazy. I hate broccoli anyway, but this man's crazy.
But it's but you could take any example. But like the let's say broccoli. If you're raising broccoli on a commercial scale, like you're at war with everything that wants to eat your broccoli, which is all sorts of stuff. And out here, we the more bugs and worms and bees and
you're not fighting nature here.
No, that's like ranching. You're working in sync with nature, right? Like
which might sound like very grandiose, and people think, yeah, of course he's going to say that, but it's legit. Like that is what's happening here. It's so unlike most of agriculture that exists.
Right. I mean, I just think like if regenerative agriculture is very, it's a hot buzzword right now. And I think, it's, I'm not a farmer, never been a farmer, but I think it's much easier, or I just think, I think it's easier to achieve regenerative goals on a ranch than it would be again, in an economically viable way on a commercial, than at a corn farm or whatever, take your, insert your fruit or vegetable. And so, when you start to peel back the onion, right. And you I give that kind of example to like kind of an extreme example, like, wow, oh my God, how can you even say that? But then you look at like the monoculture farming in the Midwest, that is like soy, corn, and wheat. It's the backbone of the plant-based industry. And these are unbelievably environmentally destructive practices, right? We're losing topsoil every year. The soil that's there is dead. And that's the runoff has created a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, the size of New Jersey some years. They're ecological deserts, right? The soil's dead. There's no life there. And I always joke, like, if you think if you think nothing died in the creation of your vegan burger, I have an oceanfront condo in St. Louis that you got to take a look at, because besides all the wildlife habitat that's been destroyed and the all the other stuff we talked about, when the combine comes out to harvest the corn or the soy or the wheat, like if there is a rabbit or a bird in there, like they're not dodging it, right? So we've coined this phrase, eat with your eyes wide open, because we all have an impact, right? Whether it's through the food we eat or the clothes we wear. None of us are perfect, obviously. We're far from it. But
your beard's pretty damn good.
but this idea that, it's like this idea that like killing an animal is a bad thing and it's wrong, but it flies in the face of everything, right? Like history, evolution, nature, life, like, and you can't there's this woman, I think her name is Diana Rogers. She has a podcast, Sustainable Dish, but she writes a lot about this stuff. And she just wrote a book called Sacred Cow. I haven't read it yet, but
I've seen the book, but I haven't read it either.
Yeah, but she has really good, messaging around this, just like really thoughtful, things that make you think, right? Like a lot about like life and death. You can't have life without death, and you can't eat food without spilling blood. And so anyway, so seeing this messaging constantly about eat plant-based, and this idea that like plant-based is good and meat is bad, it's been driving me crazy, because while we see, species like bees and butterflies tanking, and like a huge impact for that is farming.
Yeah.
And so like environmental groups that are saying eat plant-based for the planet, and then the next day it's help us save the bees and the butterflies. It's like you just want to like, grab your hair and pull it out, because it's like, here in this area on these ranches, like they're teeming with bees and butterflies and teeming with life,
because you have an intact ecosystem.
Yes, and we're not plowing up the land to plant corn and spray the living daylights out of it and then harvest it and then have a bunch of the soil disappear. Like we're building topsoil, we're providing wildlife habitat for all sorts of stuff, us and our neighbors, and I just think, that's reality. That's what's happening. But this plant-based, the plant-based narrative is, it's such a great story, right? Like you can go to Whole Foods, buy your Impossible Burger. It's made of unicorn dust and rainbows. It's going to make everything go away. Nothing was harmed in making it, and it feels great. The only problem is it's just not true. It's bullshit. And so it's just something we're really passionate about, because we just see this narrative. It keeps going and going and going. And like really, people with really big platforms are continuing to say it. And like, I have 2 kids. I think like, if we think that, vegan burgers are going to save the planet, we're screwed.
And what I'm that sums that up. But what I'm hearing here, like again and again, is look, we're talking about bison, but really your focus is it's the land, it's the soil, it's the grass, it's the biodiversity, it's the ecosystem. The bison being here is what makes that economically viable.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But the focus is all the other stuff that they walk on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the how, not the cow. It's, or it's not the cow, it's the how, whatever the saying is. You're absolutely right. You know, it's like we talked about earlier, the way, you know, like the really great ranchers have been doing this a long time. Like they say they're grass farmers, right? Like at the end of the day, we have this amazing thing, grass, that takes sunlight, soil, and water. And
it's magic.
Yes. And then I always say this, and it's the truth. And then we have animals, whether it's, whether there's wild animals like elk and moose or deer or what have you, or bison or animals in this case on, livestock, whether it's bison or cattle, that have these magical stomachs that can not just like exist and survive on grass, but like thrive.
Yeah, and it tastes damn good.
Yeah, and
it's the end product.
And it's very good for you.
Yeah,
super nutrient dense. It's extremely healthy, and it's perfect. Like this process has been going on for millennia.
Well, what I thought was really interesting earlier when we were out there with your herd was how you were talking about that the bison intuitively, is it the rumen?
Yeah.
That they will graze on, what did you say? How many species of grass?
Well, so there's this scientist, Fred Provenza. I'm reading his book, Nourishment, right now, and it's fascinating. It's again, not whether it's bison or cattle or goats or sheep or elk, whatever, but these animals, they're finding that while maybe the majority of their diet might be, say, a handful of grasses one day, they might be eating, or they're eating, say, 80, 90 different species over the course of the day. Like a little bite here, a little bite there, depending on what they need, what their stomach needs, what their stomachs, and the bacteria and the rumen and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, it's the land, biodiversity, all those different things. And bison are what we're using and what's happening here. But our neighbors are doing it with cattle. You can do it with cattle. We do it with bison. I love bison. I think they're super cool. But yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out, because it's all that other stuff that's that is so important, and that is that's what's at the root of all this stuff, and that's being completely missed in this narrative that plant-based is good. One of the many things that's being missed about this narrative that plant-based is good, meat is bad.
And this isn't just about, and this is to your point about sustainable earlier, this isn't just about keeping a landscape in this kind of neutral state. This is actually benefiting the landscape.
Sure. I mean, the research coming out showing the potential for, there's incredible potential for grasslands to store carbon, sequester carbon, suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Most people think of forests, and there are, carbon markets developing, and, like big companies looking at grasslands of how they can offset their carbon footprint.
I think they think some of the grasslands could be more than the above ground biomass.
Right. And so it's that's right. I mean, there you go. You're mitigating climate change through grassland grazing.
To your point about people's connection with food, though, you were telling me something really fascinating about how your operation works with your customer base, and like sending them pictures. Like explain to me, I'm coming to you, I want to get some bison. What do I do? How do I do it? What's the process? Because I think that whole journey, and it really is a journey, is fascinating and really does connect people with food, even if they're not physically taking it off the land themselves.
Sure. I mean, so like I said, we're very passionate about what we do, and part of our mission is connecting people to where their food comes from, and all the stuff we already talked about with the impacts we have and eating with your eyes wide open. And so for us, we sell direct to consumer. We sell, to individuals, families, and the way it works is we sell custom exempt. So we technically pre-sell live animals to, let's just say, 2 people. Each of them gets a half a bison. So we pre-sell the animal. I go out, I field harvest the animal, I field dress it, and then I take it to our processor where it's ultimately dry aged and then cut, wrapped, boxed, frozen, and then we either deliver it or ship it. But yeah, a day or two after I field harvest the animal, or the day of, when I take a picture of the herd when I'm driving out there, and then after I kill the bison, I take a picture of the bison on the ground, nothing gory, bloody, just but very obvious, a picture of a dead bison on the ground. And then take a third picture at the processor after it's been skinned and cut, sawed down the backbone, split in half, one side, shoulder side out, the other side, rib side out. And then I'll email the 2 customers or 4 customers and say, yesterday I field harvested your bison on the ranch. It was a beautiful day, or it was a snowstorm, and whatever. It's Montana,
which is 6 months of the year.
Right. Well, yeah, they joke that Montana is 9 months of winter and 3 months of friends and family, or 9 months of winter and 3 months of road construction.
Yep.
And it's now dry aging at Amsterdam Meat Shop, and I'll get in touch once it's ready, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it's been really cool to see,
what's the reaction been like?
It's interesting. I mean, some people don't, I mean, some people don't reply, so I don't know. But many people, I mean, some people have replied and saying like, "Hey, I have like tears in my eyes right now. I've never felt so connected to my food, and like I've never really engaged with food like this or thought about it like this." And or some people are just like, "Wow, this is really cool and looks amazing. Like I cannot wait to get my hands on that." And so yeah, for us, it's just like, I worked for an environmental group for 10 years, very passionate environmentalist and conservationist. And it just, there's just a lot of BS out there. And so we feel strongly about, like I keep coming back to it, like eat with your eyes wide open. Like we're going to have an impact. Let's be honest and intentional about it. And
But let's minimize the impact we have by understanding how we're consuming.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that's part of what we do.
Tyler, why do you think it's important for stories like this to be told, or for the modern huntsman family to like tell these kind of stories? Because this isn't a hunting story. Yeah, a rifle is being used, but it's an agricultural story. But it wouldn't traditionally be the kind of conversation or stories that a hunting publication, for example, like an old school hunting publication, would engage in.
Sure, and I think we've even had friends who've said, "Why the hell are you having a story about ranching in a hunting publication?" Because ultimately, it's about conservation and land use, right? Hunting's not possible if we don't get that right. And so I think that these are extensions of that. And by doing what you're doing and improving the land, and not only being a part of the land, but like I said, improving it, you're making those hunting opportunities potentially more successful. The land it's a legacy kind of thing. But I think that it trickles out from there. And I think that there's, a big part of Modern Huntsman, why we chose that word, was because centuries ago, being a hunter meant way more than just pursuing wild game. It meant knowing the land, having woodcraft, living in symbiosis, all of those kinds of things. And now in a current, in modern day, there's so many people and we all have such an impact that it's important to understand and hear from the people who are actually out there doing these things. And there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of intelligent discourse around this compared to what you hear about the plant-based stuff.
Exactly. Right.
And so the fact that you guys are out here doing this, and this is a fairly remote part of Montana. I mean, and so I think that you guys have a great platform, right? You have great messaging, but at the same time, to be able to help point to the good examples, in all cases, in food sourcing. And I think that that's kind of a responsibility as a conservationist and as a hunter and as a human, really, to make responsible choices and do that in investigation and research yourself, rather than just listen to the bullshit you see on Facebook or Instagram or any of those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I really answered the question, but
yeah, no, I think you did. I mean, obviously, I've thought about it as well,
Yeah.
and my view is that my personal view in terms of conservation is there's a lot of different groups of people doing a lot of different things, and we need to hear what each other has to say more often, because often it's like the farmers have their conversations, the hunters go and have their conversations, the people who are looking after the waterways, they go and do their conservation work. But actually, it's all integrated because it's an integrated landscape. And the more that we can integrate conservation measures and management decisions across the landscape, the more chance we have of actually preserving and making it better and restoring some of the colossal screw-ups we've made in the past. But you can't do it in silos. And I see that when I'm hunting at home. All the places that I hunt at home close to my house, it's all farmland. It's all used for cattle and sheep, a little bit of agriculture. So I'm having conversations with farmers every day. And it's maybe a little bit different in the public lands like out here that don't have farmland on it. So you have the great privilege of being in these, very much to a greater or lesser extent, untouched areas in terms of, well, it's not that obvious how they've been touched. But a lot of the world is not like that. And so I think that these collaborative approaches are so important. And to make them happen, you have to understand them. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why I think like integrating this within the conversations that we have in hunting and fishing and just being somebody who's intrigued by the outdoors is so important, because this is the landscape we exist in, and people do need to exist in it
Absolutely. No. And
because there's a lot of us.
right. And so exactly. And so it's like, how are we going to do it? Right. It's not, it's like my favorite quote is, vision without execution is hallucination. And
So basically just being high.
well, no, but it's like, but it's like, I wish that my truck ran on air or water. It doesn't. I got to put gas in it, right? And I got to pay for it. Like, there's lots of things we can wish, but like, can you make it happen? And can you fulfill that? And so, so I couldn't agree more. Like, we have to be realists about it. And how can we? I also loved your point about. I couldn't agree more. We have to like think on a bigger level and get like those siloed conversations. That doesn't work at all. And then even out here, like, I'm a public land nut. I like backcountry hunters and anglers. I love that group, and I love hunting public lands. But through this experience, when you hear about it, but like for us, I mean, and we're obviously a very, 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 very small ranch. But I have such a greater appreciation for, because there can be some public-private conflict in Montana at times, but like how many millions, whatever, hundreds of thousands of ungulates, wild ungulates, elk, mule deer, white-tailed deer, pronghorn, etc., are private lands supporting at times of the year, right? Like like where you're hunting elk,
it's important
in September, like it looks very different in January, and so that's just the perfect example. You have to have both, right? Like, you have to have the public land here, at least. I mean, the public lands are awesome and amazing because it allows anyone, right, to just go out and hike or hunt how they want to. But the private lands, like particularly you look at Bozeman and the growth of Montana, it's like every other week there's an article in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes about the growth, but it's a very real thing. Like, this place is exploding with people. And like you said, it's like, how are we going to plan for this and deal with it so that we have healthy, vibrant wildlife populations? And if you're just talking public lands or just talking private lands, like, it's not going to work. You have to talk about both of them, how they intersect, how they work together, that sort of thing.
So what's the future for your business? Where are you headed? How's it going to change? How's it going to evolve?
Something we've
What do you dream?
It's something we've talked about Sarah and I talk about a fair amount, because we've had a couple different opportunities over the past few years come up, and it's forced us to think about stuff, and we've really it's helped solidify our we do two things here, or I would say we try to do two things really well, which is raise bison as well and as in sync with nature as possible, and then number two, provide amazing meat. And that's our focus. Like, we are very clear that like that's our North Star. That's what we're doing. That's where we're putting our energy. And so, if I guess my dream would be for us to continue doing what we're doing and focusing on those two things and having it go well. And that's it. Like, those are the two things we want to do.
Well, I think I would add to that, and what I would hope to see, given some of the conversations I've had with other people with the not similar problem, but in the sense that I forget what the exact statistic is, but it was something very high, like 80 to 90% of the meat that's served in Montana schools is not from Montana. Wow. And that is strictly because of a local processing and distribution problem. So I know that's something that you've got on your mind, is trying to have a local processing facility that could not only streamline your business and your ability to process bison for your customers, but that could also serve the local community and local ranchers to process beef so they don't have to ship it off to one of the 2 or 3 big places in the United States that jack the price up and take all the margins. So maybe touch on that, because I think as an outsider, that would be something I would love to see, and that I think would be really well received.
Oh yeah, no, processing has been such a, particularly, COVID shined a bright light on how fragile our food system is, and the problems with the food industry. Exactly what you just said, that like there's like 4 companies that control something like 80% of the beef in this country.
Insane.
Yeah. And absolutely to the detriment of ranchers in Montana.
Absolutely.
Like in a huge way. And there's like, I mean, they're now antitrust investigations,
Yeah.
and like I think we'll see what happens, but so it's a completely broken system. And so, yeah, I think if we, more processing opportunities in Montana for those that want them would be awesome. And I've been involved in a lot of different conversations about that. And we're kind of all over the map of where we might go with something like that. But we're lucky that I mean, we're really lucky. Like here in this area, because we have lots of great processors. But I have a friend who's has a beef operation, grass-fed beef operation up in like northern Montana, and it's like a really difficult. Like if you look at how to, try to do direct to consumer or retail, like there's just a lot of logistical barriers to that. So that's another thing. I think ultimately for me, I'm passionate about ranching, and I guess honest messaging around food, and those are things I'm really passionate about.
Matt, I'm so incredibly excited to have the opportunity to come back here someday and watch a field harvest. I'm sad that it's probably not going to happen while I'm still here in Montana, but when I come back next time, Tyler and I are going to have to put that in the calendar and block that day off, because I would really love to see the process from start to finish, right through the abattoir, because I think it's amazing what you guys are doing here.
Well, open invitation. That would be awesome. I would love it. So let's make it happen.
Well, thank you for taking us around today, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
This has been great. Thank you guys. I absolutely love what you guys do, and this has been, I really appreciate it.
Cheers, Matt.